Howdy everyone, I am Lay, the CVA, the Community Volunteer Ambassador for the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. Go ahead and get started with our consent statement. As a visual disclosure, we'd like to inform any participants that any and all Zoom series is and will be recorded. The purpose of this is to provide the Zoom series to those who participated or missed out on the session. It is also provided the information for participants to refer back to. In addition to the visible disclosure, we'd like to, the statement will be orally stated at the beginning of each Zoom series, as I am right now, and I'm going to stop sharing and hand it off.
Awesome. And just a reminder for folks, make sure you mute your tablets or computers or whatever device you're using, cell phones. I spoke with Cathy ahead of time, and we're going to use the chat bar for those questions that we don't want to forget to answer. And then we'll hold off on questions at the end of her presentation. But Cathy Schoonmaker has been with the Park Service since 2002. She's been with our wildlife team, and she did a small stint with Samo Fun, and now she's back with us. And like I said, she's doing some really amazing work in educating the public on anticoagulants and how to become a good neighbor with the Park Service boundaries. So Cathy, you are ready to share your screen and take it away.
Okay, let me see if I can figure this out. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Oh boy, that's not going to work. I can do this. There it is. Coming. Okay. What did we say? Slideshow, right?
Beginning.
Almost there, right?
There you go.
Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now you guys aren't seeing the second slide, right? Okay. All right. Thanks again for having me. As Riza said, I was a biologist under Seth Riley for over 10 years. I was studying with him. I was one of the technicians doing the bobcat, coyote, and mountain lion work, as well as the pitfalls under Gary Bastide, if you remember Gary, those of you who are here that long. So I've been around for a long time, been part of the projects, and as my term was coming to an end, we decided to write and get some grant money to help educate our community members about the wildlife that lives around them, because I couldn't even tell you how many times I was tracking wildlife out in the park or even in the urban area, because a lot of the work that Seth does is in the urban fragmented landscape. And people came up to me and said, what are you doing, tracking aliens? I mean, so it was really, they were confused. They had no idea. And when I would say, no, there's a bobcat in your backyard, or there's a bobcat in the hillsides behind you, they were just in complete shock. So I saw that there was definitely a need for people who lived in these areas to become aware of the wildlife that's actually living there, and understanding that wildlife is not limited to just the hillsides and the mountains. And so we got a grant, and I was able to start this program. And even though there's not much money on it, we're still moving it forward because we do see that there's a need for it. Part of also what we do is we don't just talk about the wildlife that's there, but how you can coexist and live with that wildlife that moves through your neighborhoods. So with that said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do and then how I present some programs to people in the communities, and some of the other things that I've been working on throughout the years. So as you can see, and you probably know, nature is all around us. So it's just getting people aware and knowing the wildlife that lives around them. We talk about the research, of course, as well, because this is really relevant, and it helps them understand better that, that the research that we're working on is giving results that will help them coexist with these animals as well. So Bobcat study, as I'm sure Seth went over, started in 1996. It's still currently going. Mountain lion started in 2002, and coyote study started in 1996 as well. It took ended in 2004 and then started back up again a few years back. And the idea was to look at how these animals use urban areas, their movement patterns, diet, and of course causes of mortality for these animals. And as you know, probably know, most of the area here in the Santa Monica Mountains was part of the research area specifically for mountain lions. And then the bobcat and coyote work, when it first started, really started in the Simi Hills and these fragmented habitats that are adjacent to the Simi Hills and on the north side of the 101, with a little bit of work along Liberty Canyon on the south side of the 101. So this is just an example of how we catch these animals, specifically bobcats and mountain lions. They are anesthetized when we catch them in a trap, and then we take every measurement we can possibly take on them while they are asleep, and which is roughly about 45 minutes to an hour. That includes blood, and like I said, the measurements, we'll ear tag them, and then we also want to put that radio collar on because that gives us the locations of where they're actually going. Not only does it give us locations of where they go, but if for some reason that animal should die, we're able to get to that animal pretty quickly, especially in 110-degree weather before it decays, and we can figure out hopefully what it died from. So as I mentioned before, one of the biggest misconceptions I think with people who live in urban areas that are adjacent to natural habitat is they assume that wildlife lives here and people only live here. And wildlife, there's like this unforsaken boundary line or something that wildlife shouldn't cross. But that's not the case. No one gave wildlife the memo that you're not allowed to cross this fence or allowed to come into our area, but yet we can hike in your area. So you see that wildlife comes back and forth on a regular basis. And that's one of the things we did see in the study is that there are examples of wildlife all over in neighborhoods. This is P34, who was in Newberry Park, the back of someone's house. This is bobcat also in the back of someone's house. We've had coyotes moving through urban streets, and you always hear about raccoons in people's attics. One of the big things, and I know that Seth probably mentioned this as well because this is really important for Southern California, is that habitat loss and fragmentation. Encroachment, that's the new development of homes going adjacent to these natural landscapes. Fragmentation, this is one of my favorite pictures of habitat fragmentation. This is in Agora Hills, where you have this nice, decent sized open space, and then you have this small little patch called Strawberry Hill. And believe it or not, bobcats move back and forth through all of this urbanization just to get to this little small Strawberry Hill. But Strawberry Hill is not big enough to sustain it as its home range. So it ends up moving back into this larger habitat. New development, we've seen lots of that, especially in the Conejo Valley over the last 15 years, 20 years. And then of course you have habitat alteration, which is maybe the dump or golf courses being put into these areas. So these all impact these animals and bring them a little bit closer to humans. So why do we see these animals moving through urban areas? Well, there's a lot of different reasons why they could be. First of all, probably one of the most interesting is maybe first they're just exploring the urban area, looking for new habitat or home range to move into. This might be the case specifically for mountain lions because mountain lions have large home ranges and very territorial animals. So if you have young mountain lions that are born, when they're old enough to disperse, they need a place to go. And if the Santa Monica Mountains is already completely taken over by the adult mountain lions that are there, maybe one or two, then these young animals are at risk. So they need to find their own habitat and own home range so they don't get killed by the adult lion who doesn't want them there. So you might have animals just looking for their own territories, which forces them into some of these urban landscapes. And then often they check it out, doesn't work out for them, they come back because there's not a lot of food resources there. But some animals are very successful at finding food resources in these urban landscapes. And that might be a coyote a raccoon, or a possum. All of these animals have something in common because they're all omnivores. Omnivores tend to do really well in these urban landscapes. And so once they find food, they often come back to those food resources that are available. Something else that helps them become successful is if you have a lot of shrubs or bush, then there's a great places for them to have the opportunity to hide and maybe to even call their home. This is a bobcat on the bottom right here that actually denned underneath someone's house in Westlake Village, I believe. And so she was very successful. The person had left the screen open. She went right onto the crawl space. Now you can imagine it would be very protective. It's cool during the warm spring and summer days. And the coyotes generally don't go under, you know, or a coyote would have more difficulty finding them there, and coyotes will often prey on bobcats. So this is a nice safe place for her to den. Here's some other examples of bobcats and home ranges. And you can see that the stars here are dens for these bobcats. Seth might have showed this example as well. But many of these animals actually live within this urban edge, or the home range is within the urban edge, their territory. And this animal in particular, B74, used to do that, and she denned in someone's backyard a couple years in a row. And you can also see here though that this was in North Ranch area, and right through here there's a nice green belt that is the golf course. And so this was a wonderful place for her to actually go catch rabbits, bring them back to the den, which was super close in this person's backyard. And this is just a picture of Mom. You can see her underneath the legs of the kitten here, hiding in someone's, basically a wall. We got lots of pictures from people about these guys going through the urban landscape. So one of the big things is knowing the animals that are there and around you. And here's a perfect example of a food resource available for them. This bobcat here, she got a ground squirrel. And then here's just another example of mountain lion. This is points from a mountain lion. I believe this is P22. And I just want to show how urban his points may seem, although they're really not. If you think about the landscape and you go on Google Earth and you really look at the landscape closely, you can see that there's urbanization all around these fragmented habitats. But not only that, it goes right up and encroaches into it, which is what happens a lot in the Santa Monica Mountains as well as the Hollywood Hills. And even though it looks like all his points are in people's backyards, because of the way the hillside is, you can see he's actually in a natural spot here. It's just that the houses are here on the ridges. So in reality to him, this is not someone's backyard. This is what seems like a natural open space. And this is very common that you might see with these animals. But occasionally people see them, as I mentioned. So how can people and wildlife coexist? Well, one of the first things you want to do is, part of the education is just letting people know about the wildlife that lives around them. So I always like to say it's important that you know what wildlife is here, and hopefully I'm here and I'm telling you that you have bobcats, you have coyotes, you have the potential of seeing mountain lions. So being aware of that. And then, so how do you reduce potential conflicts now that you know that these animals are here? And that might be closing up hiding places that they can live or den under, or not to feed them intentionally or accidentally. So these animals are going to follow their instincts. This is a picture of coyote pups running almost downtown LA, about a half a mile from downtown LA here. So coyotes are pretty prevalent even in downtown LA. So again, how do we keep them from becoming wild squatters in our yards and our neighborhoods, and try to push them back, you know, up into the hill? And I mentioned some of this is removing some of the debris that you have there, or even ivy. Thick ivy is a great place for these animals to hide. Sealing up under crawl spaces and decks. This is P22 a few years back when he crawled underneath someone's house and the guy who was running the cable ran into him. So he was doing the cable line and found a mountain lion underneath someone's house. What a surprise. So closing up all of those spaces that give them the opportunity to hunker down and stay there is really important. Here's another example. This is in Silver Lake. This is a deck you can see off of someone's back porch. And this mom here, she used to go back and forth underneath the deck, and she had 5 pups under there. And if we're lucky, let's see, the video worked yesterday, and it's not gonna work today, of course, Riza. So I was able to show video yesterday, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to today. So here's some examples though of how we close up and seal up. So underneath the deck, you want to bring that wire out some. So then when the animal tries to crawl under the deck or dig under, they're actually digging into the wire and not through the dirt. So you want to seal up that way. You can make it look real nice with screws. Here another example. Skunks, again, is another big problem for people in decks. And then, you know, closing up those crawl spaces so you don't have a bobcat or a coyote denning underneath them. Also being aware that how high animals jump, understanding their ability to move through the landscape is really important. They're designed to jump obstacles on a regular basis. So a 6-foot fence is really quite minor to them. And in fact, a 6-foot chain link fence is really minor. If you look at this photo, you can see that the coyote is actually using the chain link to help push him over with the bottom feet here. So all they have to do is be able to get their front paws up on, and then they can pull themselves up and kind of push with their back legs. So trying to come up with different ideas and ways to install fencing to help reduce the wildlife access into someone's yard might be important. Some people really want wildlife, which is great, but other people, especially, you know, those that are afraid of the wildlife, they don't want the wildlife. So trying to come up with options for them on how they can reduce those encounters that may seem very negative to them is part of the goal of the program. So as I mentioned, especially for snakes, many people don't want snakes. I don't generally want snakes in my yard either if I have 2 young kids running around or a dog that's not trained. So putting up this fencing here, this 1/4-inch wire, and then you even have to put it under the ground some though, because not because snakes dig, but because the squirrels will dig underneath the fence line, and then the snakes will come in through the holes that the squirrels dig. So keeping that in mind. There's also something called rollers that they put on top of fence lines as well, which is great. The idea of it is really interesting. So what happens is the animal, as I mentioned, they'll try to jump up, but the roller makes those front paws slide down so they can't actually get the grip that they're trying to get. Many people have made these out of PVC piping, but they also sell it online. But you have to keep in mind of where your fence is. If your fence is up against a hillside, you know, that is 4 feet on one side, then a coyote is going to be able to jump over that with no problem. So looking at your landscape is really important for these situations as well. But fence lines, if you want to really keep coyotes out, really should be 7 to 8 feet high and not chain link. Also shouldn't be this wrought iron fencing either, because animals can actually walk right through the wrought iron fencing if you don't have some other wiring to keep them from getting through the bars. Reducing cover is one of the other things that we like to mention on a regular basis. Being able to see the wildlife that's in your backyard. If you're concerned and worried and you have thick cover in that backyard, you're not going to be able to see what's there. So having kind of that clean landscape is really important. This particular coyote was in Silver Lake, as I mentioned, the same one that denned underneath someone's deck. So she would go back and forth completely unnoticed until she actually had the pups were already born. They eventually got the pups out, by we shined very, very bright floodlights underneath the deck and played a radio. And so it was annoying to her, and she didn't want her pups there. So she eventually moved them. The problem is she just moved them to the neighbor's yard, who also had an open deck. So it ended up being somebody else's issue to an extent, but if we could just get people to start closing up and sealing up and not give them the opportunity to actually den there. This is, I don't know if you can see here, but this is kind of like Where's Waldo, but right here is a mountain lion in this person's front yard. So right here is the, can you guys see my cursor? Yes, no? Okay, good. I'm like, what am I pointing at? So right here is the bushes of where this mountain lion was found. And you can see he's very well hidden in here. And this is the area in the Santa Monica Mountains. So another nice example of me showing how encroachment, so this animal was coming from one natural area over here, ends up crossing all this urbanization, right? Just to get to the natural area over here. Well, what we think happened is, yes, he went this way at nighttime, but on the way back, it became daylight, and there started to become more commotion on the street and noise. The gardeners were out, things like that. So it wasn't safe for the animal anymore to be out in the open. So what he did is he hunkered down and hid underneath the bushes. The biologist, Jeff Sikich, if you know him, he went to go track this animal, and we just happened to be wanting to recollar the animal as well. And so he walked back and forth several times saying, where are you? I can't see where you're at. And so finally honed down on where exactly the lion was, and was able to see it. And so if you look real close, you can see the face of the mountain lion here. And the mountain lion's just looking at him, and they're just kind of saying, you don't see me, I'm hiding. So really they don't want the confrontation. They just want to go unnoticed, and they want people to go away, which is exactly what happened also with P22 when he was underneath that person's house in the Hollywood Hills. Once the news crews went away and the Department of Fish and Game left because they were shooting beanbags at him, trying to scare him out, he didn't want to have anything to do with it. Once everybody went away, he ended up leaving on his own at about 1 o'clock in the morning. So these guys, they seem scary because of, we know that they're predators, but in reality, they just don't want that confrontation. One of the other things that, besides, getting rid of that landscape and get your fencing, up high. And the other thing though is really not feeding them. A lot of people want to feed these animals because they're super cute. Raccoons kind of sucker people in. But in reality, this started as one raccoon, and she ended up bringing all of her friends and family by. The woman who lived at this house and was feeding them cat food, the raccoons had her trained basically. She would, if she was late or missed a feeding, they would actually ring her wind chimes, calling her to come feed them. She went on vacation one time, and she came back, and all of the lawn furniture that you see here in the background was all ripped up and shredded because she hadn't been there to actually feed them. So a small thing like this can end up being a big problem, not just for you, but for your neighbors as well. So we always say, please don't feed the wildlife. Don't get suckered into it. Visiting urban areas. Another reason why animals will visit urban areas besides people feeding them is this is just another example of feeding. This is a coyote in, I'm trying to remember, the Irwin Market in Calabasas. So this is a coyote here, and you can see this coyote, if you know that parking lot at all, he's in the parking lot and looking over at the shopping center door right here of the market. And he would do this every morning. And this is why, because people would come out and look at him and feed him. This man here just threw him a muffin. And so they lose their fear of people. The more we feed them, the more they're expecting from us. So and those are all purposely feeding, but there's also unintentional feeding. And so being aware of that unintentional feeding sources, such as leaving your pet food out, bird feeders, fruit, trash from our compost. And this is one of my favorite pictures, is this coyote here. Got a picture, I got him a picture of him in the natural habitat, but you can see that this watermelon he has in his mouth with the sticker clearly did not come from the natural habitat. It came from someone's compost bin, their trash can. So it came from that urban landscape. Here we go again. So there's more examples of compost bins. And if you know the wildlife that lives around you, there are ways that you can keep your animals protected and safe. So if you have, many people are getting chickens now or have chickens, and understanding that chickens are a food resource, especially for raccoons, possums, and the coyotes. Even the hawks, the raptors, will go after the chickens as well. So making sure they're in full enclosures is really important. And there's these things that people have been making now called cat patios, where it's kind of a patio outside for your cat. Those are really great. So the cat still gets the experience of getting to be outside, but it's protected from potential predators such as a coyote. Or even, potential, dog runs to keep your dog, or rabbits, whatever you have. There's all kinds of different ideas that people have been using. This is an extension that someone did to their backyard to make it a little bit higher of a fence line to keep the coyotes from jumping over. This one I like because they took the eaves of the house on the side yard and they just closed it in so their pet could go in and out and they wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. So then you could put a dog door in or a cat door and the animal goes in and out. Just some more examples. This is this mountain lion, and unfortunately, like I said, I can't, oh, maybe I can. Let's see if I can share the video. It's just a nice example to show about fences and how easily they jump on. Nothing to it. So it's really important to keep your animals safe. I assume that Seth talked about that as well. So this program is not just for people who live in that urban landscape, but it's also for people who live within the Santa Monica Mountains, who have hobby goats as pets. Maybe they live in, or they have sheep, or they have the chickens. So it's really giving them that, the reminder that these animals are here. And maybe if you haven't seen them in 10 years, doesn't mean they're not there. They just haven't found your area yet. And at some point they may. And as I mentioned, once animals find an area and they're successful, they tend to come back to that location. So putting your animals in full enclosures at nighttime is really important, or guard dogs if you have goats, things like that, or sheep that need a larger range and protected area. So during the study, obviously we see animals go into urban areas, but we also see that we're looking at the mortality of these animals. We see that vehicle collision, which is something we completely expected to happen with animals going across roads and being in an urban area, that we would have a lot of vehicle collision and mortality from cars. What we didn't expect to see, though, is animals dying from anticoagulant rodenticide poisons. And so this was something, though, that was occurring, for coyotes pretty regularly. About 83% of the coyotes in the diet or in the study tested positive for rat poisons, and it was the second leading cause of death for them. We also found that mange was a huge problem for bobcats. And with the mange, in 2002, we had a really large mange outbreak and several animals died from it. We're still seeing mange in the environment now. Mange is something that is common in the environment. Animals get it, but they usually can fight it off. It's a small mite that eats the skin. And you can see there for a while, they lay eggs, more mites come and they continue to eat their skin, and their eyes start crusting over, and eventually, which is really unfortunate, they end up starving to death, these bobcats and coyotes that get the mange, because they can no longer hunt anymore. Their eyes get so crusted over and they get so tired that they just are too weak to hunt. And what they found in the study is that the bobcats were actually getting, that had mange, also had levels of anticoagulants in their system. So their livers would be tested, and we would find several different compounds of rat poisons. And there was a study that looked at the immune, how their body handled with rat poisons in their system, and it actually weakened their immune system. And so this is just an example of us doing our necropsies of these animals, and every animal that we're able to find and actually be able to do a necropsy and get a liver sample, we would do that. So every animal that was still in good enough condition when we got it, we would able to necropsy it and send a sample of that liver in. And this is how we were able to determine about the rodenticide poisons in these bodies. So rodent poisons are affecting more than just the rats. And this is one of the things that we were able to see with this study, which is a good thing that we were able to determine this and see this. You can see that rodent poisons are, people are putting them right in their own backyards. This is actually a townhouse complex that has rodenticides, kind of like in this natural area, not too far from their lawn. They're going to, not only do they target rats, but they target gophers, squirrels. So it's, voles, I guess, would be another thing that they target as well. This particular bobcat was found in Simi Hills. It had 6 different types of poisons in its liver when the sample came back. So small mammals are super important to the diet of these animals. We know that they come into urban areas, and we know they like to eat small mammals. Bobcats in the study do like rabbits quite a bit, but they do eat wood rats, squirrels, and pocket gophers, and voles, and other small mammals such as mice. So they definitely have that potential of getting the poisons in their system if those are the animals that we're targeting. The same thing with coyotes. As I mentioned, coyotes eat fruit as well, but they eat lots of small mammals also, including rabbits, wood rats, gophers, and squirrels. So how does this happen? Well, we have many different vessels of putting poisons out now. Sometimes you will see these black boxes, you'll see these green boxes, you'll see these upside down teas that are made of PVC piping. Really creative. I've seen poisons in fake rocks as well, so they don't look so bad. So they're very creative on how they're putting the poisons out. Usually there are these little grains here, or pellets. Sometimes they're little pouches that they attach to the box. And it's a sweet smell bait. The animal goes in, takes some of the bait, and then comes back out. It does not get trapped in these boxes, and it moves in and out through the environment. And this is one of the ways that it's really moving up through the food chain, is because as these animals continue to go in and get poisoned and they come back out, they start to get slower and slower, and they become easier to catch for our predators. And it can take up to 10 days before an animal can die. These are distributed all over the place. You'll see them at golf courses, local businesses, our HOAs use them, apartment complexes. They're rampant everywhere. And you can see this one really not only is targeting, if you can see all the pellets that have spilled out of here, when it comes from the top like this and it's a loose bait, and here's another, you can faintly see the blue pellets here. Any animal that goes into this can pull that out as their body runs through it. So they might kind of go in, take a bite, they run out the other side, and they start pulling some of that bait out. Well, now your pet's exposed to it. If it comes up, it licks it, smells it. You also have songbirds that like to eat grain, right? And so they could potentially end up eating it as well. So now it's just out there and it's not in a contained vessel anymore. Let's see if I can show this video. This is so this is what happens to rodents when they actually get poisons and it starts to really kick in and affect them. It's kind of long, so I'm gonna just get to the chase of it. And you can see how this might be really appealing for something that eats mice, right? Or rats. This is a super easy catch for them. Why wouldn't they go for it? And then unfortunately, they end up getting exposed to the poisons as well. So you can see how it moves up the food chain here. This is a nice graphic that we were able to put together of not only showing that it affects the wildlife, but it also can affect people's pets as well. So if you have a cat that likes to go for things like rats or mice, they also can be exposed to this. We actually had, it's pretty crazy, one of the people that works at the park, Catherine Beverly Bishop, if you've met her, she was actually bit by a rat that she thought had poisons because it was acting all funny. It was doing the circles just like that particular rat was doing and acting very sick because there's no other reason for a rat to bite her. So she ended up having to go through a bunch of rabies shots and everything because they didn't know what to think with a rat biting her. But it's likely that animal had poison. We were never able to catch it and test it, but unfortunately, I think it's quite possible. Had the same symptoms. So not only are our mammals being affected by this, but we would assume, we know that owls and hawks are also being impacted. We don't have any evidence of livers from the weasel or snakes, although it would be very interesting. But you can imagine if they eat mice or rats that are poisoned, they are potentially exposed as well. So there's several different types of anticoagulants or compounds that you can find. First generation and second generation. So the first generation was produced earlier and it stopped working as effectively. It took a long time and the animals started to get wise of it. The second generation of rodenticide poisons came out more recently. And it is way more potent and it basically an animal, a rodent can go in and get and eat it and it can get a toxic dose in one setting. The problem is it doesn't die in that one setting though either, and it doesn't die in the box. In fact, what happens is they might have already had that toxic dose, but they continue to go back because it tastes good and they're not feeling the effects of that dose yet. Once they start feeling it, they probably don't go visit the box as much anymore, but they're still in the environment and moving around. Many of our bobcats didn't test for just one different type of compound. They tested for several different types of compounds. So they had 2, 3, or 4, even up to 5 and 6 different types of poisons that were found in the system. And some of that was first generation and second generation poisoning. So I mentioned earlier that 83% of the coyotes in the study that we were able to test their livers were exposed to these rodent poisons. 90% of the bobcats in our study also tested positive for the rat poisons. 95% of the mountain lions in the study tested positive for rat poisons, with 5 mountain lions actually dying directly from those poisonings. We've found raccoons being exposed. This is a raccoon that we were studying off the 405 freeway, and in someone's neighborhood. She ended up dying underneath someone's deck. And it's so ironic that there was a poison bait box right next to her where she died. P22, I think Seth mentioned this. He had a couple different compounds of rat poisons. He had first generation and second generation. And then I already showed you the Simi Valley bobcat. Our very first two lions to die were P3 and P4, and they were in the Simi Hills. And then our third lion had 5 different compounds. This is the one I showed you in the beginning in Newbury Park. She was on the fence, and she got moved back to the natural habitat after they captured her. And then 9 months later, she died from rodenticide poisons in Point Mugu State Park. She was just completely laid out on the trail there, which seems very unusual, right? That usually animals want to go die somewhere and hide when they're not feeling good. And when we were talking to the vet during the necropsy, one of the things they mentioned is potentially because anticoagulants prevent your body from clotting the blood, right? So you end up having a body cavity full of blood. So it's not running through your veins anymore, and you start to feel cold. And so they believe that maybe she was feeling cold and was trying to warm herself in the sun and eventually succumb to the poisons. And then our fourth lion, 6 different compounds of anticoagulant rodenticides, hemorrhaging in the head and the lungs. And then our 5th lion to die was also in September 2019. So 2019 was kind of a tough year. We're still waiting for results on other lions for this year, and whether they've actually died from it or not. But these are the ones that just died from it, but still 95% actually tested positive, but not all of them died from rat poisons directly. They might have died from something else. So it's not just happening here in the Santa Monica Mountains, it's also happening throughout the state and the country. In 2016, 111 mountain lions were tested in 37 different counties of California. Also 95% tested positive. Was really surprised to hear that black bears are testing positive for rodenticide poisons as well. So there's just many different raccoons, foxes, skunks. Like I said, anything that eats another animal, at some point, one of these species ends up testing positive. So I talked about first generation and second generation. No poison is a safe poison. 2014, they banned homeowners from actually being able to purchase the second generation over the counter because that is the stronger poison, and they thought the homeowners were potentially misusing these poisons. But since then, we've still had a rash of animals dying and still having anticoagulants in their system, and it's still moving up that food chain. So it's clearly not homeowners, it's the poison itself. It's the fact that these animals don't die in the boxes and now they become easy prey for other animals. There are different types of poisons, but they're not safe either. We have found cholesterol, I can't even say it, vitamin D, and bromethalin. We've found all of these in our animals as well as it's moved up the food chain. And these poisons, if your cat or dog were to get into it, they are extremely toxic to them because it's really hard to diagnose what they got into, and there's no antidote for it. So then I talk about, just what are some of our alternatives, because people don't like having rats, and I get that. We don't like having a lot of rats, but there's other ways to handle it. I mean, we used to do it for years, right? And there's so many different options out there. So you have your traps, of course. Anything that's in the house, you want to go ahead and trap, right? But maybe the main thing is to prevent them from actually getting in your house. So there's this great graphic that Marin County did of trying to keep rodents at bay on your property. And we talk about closing up and sealing up and removing food resources. And so I'll show you some close examples of that. So closing up and sealing up your attics, your crawl spaces. Boy, that kind of sounds familiar, right? Not only does it work for wildlife you may not want squatting in your yard, but it might work for these rodents as well. For rodents though, you want to use the 1/4 inch wire, which is smaller wire, so they can't get through the holes. A mouse can get into a hole that's the size of a dime, so they can really squeeze into small spots. Really audit your house is what we suggest, because all of these little holes that the cable guy puts in, they don't usually seal them up. So you need to make sure you call someone to come seal it up for you, or you find these holes yourself and seal them up along the pipes, the wires, and then even under your door gaps, make sure your weather stripping is really secure and snug. Here's some examples of that here. Some great examples of how to use the metal plating, steel wool, 1/4 inch wire, and all these open spots. Another example, foam also, and here's some steel wool. Even your, if you live in an area that's really infested, maybe even your laundry vents need to be covered. Some examples of some tools. And then this is an example of just kind of some of the weather stripping you might consider for your garages, is making sure those are secure as well. And if you have potential of them going up pipes, you can, like I said, people have become really creative, right? Is these little plastic cones they're putting around pipes now. So that's exclusion from the house, which is really important, or any structure. So exclusion from the house, exclusion from your sheds. But then there's also removing that food resources. What's causing them to do so well in your area? And a lot of times you might find that bird feeders are a huge food resource for them. So birds are super messy. They're not very kind when they eat. They have no etiquette. They just take the seed and it goes all over the place. They flip it everywhere. And then you have a pile of seed all over the ground there. Well, who do you think comes in at nighttime and eats all that seed up if you're not cleaning it up? So really need to consider that. If you have bird feeders, I'm not saying get rid of all your bird feeders, although you could do it with native plants. You could put your bird feeder over a hard surface, put it out during a certain, during the daytime hours, and then bring it back in at nighttime, so you don't have this situation where they're actually on the bird feeder. But then also clean up or sweep up, because you put it over a hard surface, so you can sweep it up every day so they don't eat the droppings on the ground. The other thing is they really like to nest up here in these tall palms, as well as squirrels. So and there's tons of fruit available for them up here, as well as fruit along for our fruit trees. So harvesting your fruit is really important. But you can see that I found this at a lot of cities like to put bands around their trees now. And you could do this, you could band around your tree or cone around your tree as well if you have a fruit tree in the backyard that you want to keep them out of. So it's another option. And then of course, close up trash cans and compost bins, because compost bins, not only will they feed, the coyotes, the raccoons, and the possums, but they're also potentially feeding rodents. And here's just some examples of closing up your garden or your compost bin as well. And then back to that thick vegetation. Same thing that we talked about with wildlife in general is if you trim up your ivy, which is a great place for rodents to hang out in, or any of this thick vegetation here, make it open and clean so they don't have a place to hide and nest in. Because remember, you're getting them out of your house by sealing up and excluding, but you also probably don't want them living in your yard as well. So trim that vegetation up and make it so you can see if problems are occurring. The other thing I've been working on is providing options for mostly people who live in these maybe fragmented habitats, or I've been trying these at schools or open parks, is how to control rodents, especially ground squirrels, because ground squirrels has been one of the big questions that everyone's been having. How do we deal with these ground squirrels? Or especially on the hillsides, you know, you have in Agora and Thousand Oaks, you have a lot of hillsides that people live at. And so we've been kind of experimenting with Raptor Perches. We put 3 Raptor Perches up at Diamond X, and within, I think 4 months, or actually I don't think it's been that long, 3 months, they have already been used. And we have red shoulders using them. We have Cooper's hawks using them. So this is a nice example of a Raptor Perch at DX. And then we have a great horned owl as well, using every couple of days. I see this animal come through. I've been working with, who is it? Las Virgenes Municipal Water District. They also are looking to install Raptor Perches now and owl boxes, which is great. So hopefully we can get a program started with them. And most recently, I've been with Oak Park School District, and they've been working on, a couple years ago, they put, as an Eagle Scout project, they put up 10 owl boxes. Last year, there was no activity in them. This year, there was activity, and 3 of the 10 were occupied, which is good news. It made them very happy to see and to hear that. This box here is at a high school. So it's along the ball fields of a high school in Oak Park. And then this one, I don't know if you can see it, there's a box right here on the outside of the fence line. This one to me was really, really interesting. It was my favorite spot that they had picked, but over the break and the COVID time, they ended up putting all these new container pods in for classrooms. And so there was a bunch of construction, of course, right during kind of that spring, early summer when they would be nesting. And I thought, for sure, there can't be anything there. And sure enough, I looked at it, and there's evidence of animals using it. So it looks like it was also used this year. So barn owls can handle some of that noise and disturbance, which is really great. So they are pretty good options for areas such as schools and potentially park areas to be able to handle that. And they tend to eat, when I go through the owl pellets, I often find gopher is a big source of food for the barn owls, as well as rats. So one of the things I'm also doing with the schools and all these Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, as well as our own perches, is we want to go through the pellets. I don't know if you guys know about Justin Brown. When he did the diet study for the coyotes, they had volunteers come and actually pick through poop. Not that much fun, but fun, because it's really interesting. So I'm going to, at some point, when we can have volunteers again, my goal is to have volunteers help me pick through vomit, or barn owl pellets. And this is a great way to see what their diet was. And we'll hopefully get a chance to look at diet in more natural habitats, and diet in particularly more of these urban landscapes that might be next to a school, and see how it's a little bit different or the same, and what are they eating, and how successful are these boxes and perches. Because in reality, hopefully we'll have these guys using the perches as well at these facilities. So I think that's mostly it. So kind of in conclusion, we're all neighbors to nature. If we have attractants in the urban areas, it's obviously going to attract wildlife. And so we should know who our wildlife neighbors are, and different ways that we know how to reduce some of those encounters if we don't want to have those encounters, particularly by removing food resources that are intentional or unintentional food resources. And then one of the big things is how we can be better stewards, knowing that we have this wildlife here, how can we live with them and not actually poison them and control rodents in our neighborhoods as well. Some of that is cleaning up and sealing up, as we talked about. And then that education to the community. So you've all been educated, I hope, and I'll be able to answer some questions. And maybe now you can help be stewards that help me get this information out to others. And with that, help me break the poison chain. And you guys can always email me if you have any questions, or you can ask questions now.
Thanks so much, Cathy. We actually have had some questions coming in as you've been talking. I'll start from the top and kind of work my way down. Someone said that last week someone on Nextdoor posted pictures of a mountain lion near Potrero Road, and it appeared to be not tagged or fitted with a radio collar. And they were asking, are there some around that are not identified? And by identified, I'm assuming they mean tagged.
Yes, absolutely. So the Santa Monica Mountains, probably a lot of you know that it's not all owned by the Park Service. In fact, the Park Service only owns a small portion of it. State Parks owns a little bit more, but there's also lots of private owners throughout the mountains. And so there's no way that we could potentially catch all the lions or even know about all the lions that are out there. It's just a sample, the study that we're working on, and we only trap in our, where we have permission to trap, mostly on MPS property. And so we do have cameras in various locations, and sometimes we get pictures of uncollared animals. So there's always potential for other animals to be out there. We never say that we have all of them, ever, in any species.
Great, thank you. Next question. Somebody's pest control company told them that animals have to eat several poison rats, or several poisoned animals have to be eaten in order to hurt coyotes, bobcats, or mountain lions. Is that true?
So we don't know how many poisoned animals they actually have to eat. There's no study that actually says that. But if you're thinking about how many people are putting out poisons and how many poisoned rats there are out there, it's not too hard for an animal to eat several poisoned rats, or for a mountain lion to eat one poisoned coyote that ate a few poisoned rats. So like I said, we just don't know exactly how many. All we know is how much poison they actually have in their system after they are found, and we send it in to be for the necropsy and tested. So I wouldn't say that that's the case. No, we don't know. But I think a lot of pesticide companies, they kind of say things because they still want you to use them. They don't want to lose their livelihood and their business, and I get that. So they're going to say all kinds of different things, but we have no proof of how much. In fact, before these poisons even came out, there was talk that they don't poison, that doesn't move up the food chain. And clearly it does.
Okay, great. Thank you for answering that. We do have a question about non-native fox squirrels and how to deter them. This person said that they used laser light to try to deter them from eating the fruit on their trees. Do you have any, one of the questions is that considered harassment of wildlife? And I guess, are there any other ways to deter squirrels from eating fruit from a fruit tree?
Yeah. So one of the things that I would suggest again is doing that if you looked at the band around the tree that I was talking about, you want to band the trees if you can. The big problem with fox squirrels is they are pretty good jumpers. So thinking about their ability to do things. So it's playing a game of survivor with these animals, right? So who can outwit and outsmart who? You are older, you're smarter, right? So it's playing that, that game of back and forth. So a couple things to think about. Where's the tree positioned? Is it next to a fence line? Is it next to a cable line that it goes to the tree? So trimming back all of those branches to give them the ability to actually just crawl or walk right into the tree. They can jump, so maybe you can trim it back farther to keep them from actually jumping. And then you also want to trim anything back from your roofs because they could get onto your roof and then jump from your roof as well. So these are all some things to think about when you're trying to determine how to get them to stay out of the trees. Obviously pick the fruit as soon as it's ready and give them the crap fruit. So maybe that's not as appealing for them, you know. And then some people try water, like they have the motion sensor sprinklers that when they see the motion of the animal, because you can point it up, it has to hook to a hose. And then when they trigger it, it sprays them. So that's another potential possibility, but it really is a game of trying different things. I've always thought, well, wonder if Vaseline would work or something that if it's a fence line there and you can't keep them off the fence line, can you put something on the fence line that makes it so their feet, they don't like it, you know, like Vaseline or something different. So be creative and this is where it's great to bounce ideas off of other people because there is no perfect answer for because every situation is different and every individual animal is different. It's just having the ability to try different techniques and different things. But if you come up with a great answer for anything, definitely let us know so that we can tell other people, hey, this really worked well for someone else.
Great, thanks. We have a couple of questions. Next couple of questions deal with rodenticide. One is, can carnivores be saved once they ingest rats with rodenticide? Is there a cure?
So there have been some situations where we've actually been able to help some animals. Finding them in time often is the big problem, right? So P22 had rodenticides in his system. He had first generation and second generation. And what they did is they gave him vitamin K, which helps build that blocking ability so that they could start clotting again. So they got he got a large dose of vitamin K. And for animals that have mange, specifically the bobcats and then the mountain lions and coyotes, what we try to do is we actually give them a ivermectin of some sort, right? Something that fights that, same as you put on your cat or dog to fight fleas. So we give them that if we can. We've had a couple where we took to the Wildlife Care Center. And like I said, if you can get to them early enough, but a lot of times you don't know they're as sick as they are until people start seeing them a lot. And then in that situation, sometimes they're just so sick that there's nothing you can do. But we have had two that we took to the Wildlife Care Center and they were able to rehab them and put them back out into the area that we caught them. The problem is within, I would say another year, they were unfortunately they died again. And that they died from also having anticoagulants again. So there's some, you know, it's hard. But it definitely, you can help them. The same with dogs, pets. And that's why for the anticoagulants that is a potential, but most cases we don't get to them fast enough.
Okay, thank you. And you touched a little bit on this already, but someone was asking about updates on legislation, state and or federal, to ban secondary poisoning.
Yeah, there is, and I don't talk much about that because we're really not supposed to advocate, being the Park Service. There is something that's, I can't remember, it's AB something. I don't have the full number on me. Sorry about that. But I know that poison-free Agora and poison-free Malibu talk about it. And it's been on hold right now. They tried to pass it to ban rodenticides throughout. I'm trying to see if I can find the number for you guys here. But they tried to ban and put it out, to ban it. It went through several different legislative branches, and then it got held up. So right now, there's nothing totally successful on it. I wish I had more info for you on that one, because like I said, I don't, because we're not supposed to advocate for these legislative things. I don't really have that info on you, but I could get it for you.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know the number. I wish I knew the number.
There was a question, I'm trying to scroll back up here. So I know with cats that if you plant rosemary, that will deter cats from coming around your yard. Are there any plants that deter rats from your yard, or substances like red pepper, or I don't know, or something like that, that you can sprinkle on the ground to deter rats and mice?
So there's several different things. There's something, well, things with mint often is what people recommend. And it works for some animals. There's also this thing called, it's a new ingredient called Propel that has been getting a lot of hits lately that people are recommending as well. And so that's called Propel. And then there's also some thick rooted plants that you can plant in your yards to help prevent the rodents, and they don't seem to like those as much. Again, poison-free Agora, or not Agora, Malibu has a ton of research that they've been looking at for alternatives, specifically dealing with natural alternatives like that, or what mints work and what deterrents work. You have to keep in mind though, all those deterrents that you use, they need to be reused and reapplied on a regular basis or they won't work. So that is something to keep up. And it doesn't always work on every animal, every, individual animal. Like I said, depending on the location and the situation, things change. But I would definitely say check Poison-Free Agora. They have lots of ideas that you can look at. I don't have the one answer for everything because I don't think there is one answer for everything.
Okay. A question came in. Can rodenticides dissolve or otherwise wash into or reach surface water, streams, creeks, or drinking water supplies?
That's a good question. They shouldn't be able to, because if they're in the vessels, right, where they're actually supposed to be contained, that shouldn't be a problem. But like you saw in the video that or my PowerPoint, that there's pellets and grains all over the place in some of these areas. And I know that for agricultural, they can broadcast as well, which means just throw pellets out. So agricultural farm areas are allowed to do that. So potentially they can get into. Now what the implications are of that, I'm not sure. You know, we haven't done any studies on the water or the streams we haven't seen anything, let's put it that way. So I don't know for sure, but I mean, I would assume that they could get in there and it can disintegrate, but I don't know how it affects wildlife. Or
okay. Right. It looks like you may have some takers when you start your vomit detail group.
Awesome.
We've had a few people talk about seeing places that, I don't know if all of these places are close to the park, but there are questions about reporting animal feeders. Like who would they report that to? Or what do you do when you see somebody being a bad park neighbor? Is there some place to report that? Or is there something that the park would do? Or, so just thought I'd throw that out there. There are a few questions about that have come up.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really a California Fish and Wildlife law that you're not supposed to feed wildlife. And so that would be who you report anything that's not on Park Service property. We can't do anything if it's not on Park Service property. If it's on Park Service property, we could potentially try to have a ranger go out and talk. But I mean, I tried to, it's really a funny story and kind of sad, but I staked out at Irwin Market in Calabasas for a couple of weeks and watched people feed this coyote, and I would go and try to haze it and scare it. And I had people coming and yelling at me that I was being mean and it was the wrong thing to do. And I reported it to the city and the state. Unfortunately, no one did anything. And it wasn't our jurisdiction to do anything. I even said something to Irwin Market. Can I put a poster up that says, don't feed? They just didn't want to get involved, which was unfortunate. And so it's definitely one of those situations where you want to help, but sometimes you just aren't sure how to. So the best thing I could say is do the best that you can do to communicate to the person and say, hey, you know what, you're actually hurting wildlife more than you're helping it by feeding it. And sometimes you just need to say it a couple of times, maybe more. Try to get them to watch a presentation, if they could watch the Zoom, I don't know. But just getting them to be aware is probably your first step. And being forceful is not the answer. Being, gentle and having them understand why it's a problem and how it impacts the wildlife, especially coyotes, because coyotes have such a bad rap already that when people see them, and they're also super inquisitive. So you can feed a coyote a few times and then they start expecting those handouts. And that's what really gets them in trouble. Like I said, that coyote at Irwin Market came back every day because it was getting those handouts and it was coming super close to people. And it was just a matter of time before it got bit. Now, I removed myself from that situation because there was really nothing else I could do with it. So I don't know if it's still there or not, or how long he stayed there. But I would just say, their Fish and Game has a, or Fish and Wildlife, I'm sorry, California Fish and Wildlife has a, something about keep me wild, don't feed me, infographic that is a flyer or handout that you can print out, and then you can also give to your neighbors or carry those around with you, things like that. Because the national park is wild space. So that's the direction I would really suggest going, or calling them directly.
Okay, great. And just a couple of more things, and then we'll wrap up. One was, could you go back to the slide on how to put up the wire at a right angle under fences for coyotes? And then the slide for sealing up openings with that too. I'd love to take a photo as reminders, if that's okay.
Sure, let me see if I can find it. Oh,
Like ground
that
one? Yeah. So there's that one. The wire at a right angle.
okay. What was the other one?
The other one was, and then the slide for sealing up openings with that too, with wire. And for anybody watching this, we will post this so that you can go back through and see this.
Is this
And
the one you're looking for?
I think so.
I have that one, that one. Yeah, I think that's,
Okay, let me see. Yeah, yep, that was it. And then Jody looked up the information for the number you were looking for. She asked, is it AB1788?
that might be it. That sounds like it.
Yeah, she put in the chat box the link
Thank
for
you.
California bill to ban rodenticides. So thank you, Jody, for doing that.
Yep, okay, yeah, so what was it, 1788, right?
AB1788.
Yep, that's the newest one. And if you guys want more information on that legislation piece, then and updates on it, really go through Poison Free Agora or Poison Free Malibu. Sign up to get on their list, because they send that stuff out all the time. They send out when it's time to do a signature for the petitions and support. And so they can give you a lot more information on that, because like I said, we don't do that. We've been told not to, so I stay away from those things. So they're your best bet for that. And they've been really good partners for me, and I do a lot of programs with them. We do it as a tag team situation. We'll go to HOAs, we'll go to clubs, things like that, the homeowner associations and cities, and we'll work together to try to get them to use alternatives, and even for cities to pass resolutions. There's been several cities that have passed resolutions locally. So Ojai, Camarillo, Thousand Oaks, Agora Hills, Calabasas. And what the resolutions are is that the city won't actually use the rodenticide poisons on city property, but they cannot force residents to not use it. So they have no authority to prevent residents from actually using rodenticide poisons, but they, through their resolution, try to provide some education to encourage residents to not. And some cities have actually put up websites about it. Moore Park has been really good. Simi Valley does not use rodenticides. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that Poison Free Agora has done to really help, and Poison Free Malibu, to move these things forward. And it's been amazing. But they, like I said, they can't force residents, HOAs, businesses to not use. And that's where the laws are coming in, trying to get the laws passed.
Okay. Thank you. One last thing that came up, and then that will be it, is there's been some talk in the chat box about mothballs and whether or not they are harmful or whether or not they work. Any thoughts on that?
For rats, I have not heard anything saying that mothballs work. If you find that they work, great, let me know, but I have not found anything that showed that they work. Just keep in mind, if you guys are testing things, one of the best ways to test is if you know you have a problem, if you can get a wildlife camera on it and then start testing different things and using that wildlife camera, it might be a great way to see what's working and what's not working for you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, thank you. I don't see any more questions coming in.
Hey, Sarah.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to share a couple of quick stories that relate to what Cathy was talking about. And I remember years and years ago seeing news stories. One was about a neighborhood in Woodland Hills where the neighbors had been feeding the coyotes, putting food out for them. And then there were so many coming down, they stopped doing it. But of course the coyotes kept coming there, and since the food wasn't there, they started eating the pets. So of course the neighborhood was upset. And then I saw another news story years ago where down in Orange County, somewhere they were having problems with coyotes. And they were talking to one woman who said, I can't believe those mean coyotes are coming down here and eating our pets. As if the coyotes were thinking, gee, I wonder how we can piss these people off. I know, let's eat their pets. So it sort of relates to what Cathy was saying, that people need to be educated. So that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, we hear those stories all the time, and most bites that happen to people are because of feeding. An intentional feeding of coyotes is why most people end up getting bit. That is usually, if you can trace it back, you can find that coyote has been fed in the past history.
Yeah, and for those of you were asking about seeing this video, in the future, it will be on our partner's YouTube channel, Samo Fund. When you search them on YouTube, make sure you're not just looking at their playlist, that you're actually clicking on Samo Fund's video tab, and that'll give you the menu of all the videos that we have there from our past presentations. So if you just look at the playlist, it may not highlight all the videos we've had recorded, but you have to click on that video tab in order to see all the videos we have uploaded onto that channel. And I put the direct link to the video channel in the chat. So if you want to take a few minutes to grab that link, search it on your Google or Internet Explorer, and then bookmarking it for a faster and easier way to find it as well.
Yeah, thanks, Raisa. Yeah, and you will find quite a library of videos there. So we've had many great speakers, and Cathy has been one of those great speakers. So thank you so much, Cathy, for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm always learning new stuff from all our presenters, and yourself included, and there's always great questions like, oh, I never thought about that, and So thank you for taking time to answer all those questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Have a